Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Over a year ago I moved out of my parents' house, for the second time, into my own place. No roommates, no sister, just me, which is exactly what I wanted. I still got lonely, but the whole idea was to focus on bettering myself among other things. Of course it didn't go so well and I felt worse and worse even though I was better at my place than my parents. To cope, I had this habit starting high school, to go on night walks whenever I was sad, felt lonely or whatever, to air my thoughts. Since I was in a new place, I had to find new routes and get my bearings. See, my house is in a village in the middle of the French countryside, near one of the last truly wild rivers of Europe. There are few inhabitants, fewer people out at night and no traffic, but that only meant I had the stars, the marsh, a forested area, the river and all its wildlife to myself. Very soon I had a few routes and a favorite place, on the riverbank, at the edge of the marsh. The absolute definition of peaceful, surrounded by trees and bush. You could only hear the water flowing and nocturnal birds. It was also somewhat concealed by a large, crooked tree that formed a natural place to sit comfortably. This place though is especially dark. Even when the moon is out it's very dim. In just the first 2 months I went a few times a week in the evening, in the middle of the night, or just before daybreak with nothing weird happening. One unremarkable night, when I went there, I was surprised to find someone sitting in the dark, on my spot. I was a tad annoyed but I said hi and sat nonetheless because I have no conception of personal space. The only answer I got was a and a strange smell, kind of like sweat, dirt and raw fish mixed together, so I immediately assumed it was a hobo. I have no animosity toward hobos since my uncle was stranded on the street at some point, so I decided to strike conversation and mumbled something about the beauty of the spot, and if it was the first time said hobo came around. She, as it turned out, answered timidly in a very thick patois with a few words of French thrown in there, a bit of Breton also I assumed. However, that language was entirely alien to me, though I vaguely understood the general idea that the answer was no, and that she liked the place too. Despite the language barrier we got to talk a little bit about where she was from, where she was going, and I guessed that she didn't know, without being able to make heads or tails of what all the rest of the words were about. Despite that, she seemed happy that I talked to her, or at least tried to, and thanked me. I figured she was alone in the area, so I asked her if she wanted me to bring her something to eat, since my house wasn't too far, but she refused politely, with all the politeness in the world in fact, so much so that it felt weird. I decided to go home not too long after, and told her to take care. On my way I felt watched but didn't pay much attention to it since that's usually how it goes at night. A few days later I came back, and she was there so I went and sat next to her. She said hi before I could utter a syllable, which led me to think that she was happy to see me. We once again tried to talk, but it quickly turned into a French lesson for her since she kept repeating what I said, pointed at things and asking how they were called. Behavior that you would expect from an eager child in class. Truth be told, it was kind of fun. When I told her that I was going home, she asked me timidly, in a very, very broken French, if I was going to come back. The reasonable and slightly paranoid thing to say would have been no, since I knew nothing about her, but absolutely out of character I told her I'd be back again. And I did come back, not just once, but for weeks. Not just for her but also because after the third or fourth time seeing her I understood that it made me feel good to talk to another human being. And what's more, to help her. Soon she started to understand me better, and likewise though her accent was thick as hell and she still fumbled on her words or didn't know how to say a lot of things. At some point I thought that I might as well bring food with me, and she'd eat it. Not as an all the eggs thing, but still I wanted to make sure that she did eat properly and I made the mistake of asking her what she usually ate. raw fish and berries. From this point on I thought that she was a power hobo. Still, she was really happy that I brought her food, and never skipped a "thank you" better. Often she'd say it twice or thrice. Once I brought her cake I made during the day, and she was all fuzzy while I was there. I even saw her smile, which was a first. She was still very timid and polite, but the French lesson became more and more of a friendly chat rather than a professor addressing her student, and though discussion subjects were few, we enjoyed each other's company. When summer was almost over and the brisk autumnal wind came around with its lot of cold nights, I was surprised, albeit glad, that she was still there, and so I asked her if she had a shelter nearby. Her answer was negative. Then I asked her if she had any plans for the winter. No. I figured that since I still had my heart in my chest and my body wasn't dumped in the river with a cinder block, I'd suggest that she could come stay at my house. At first she was reluctant, but she just did not want to bother me anymore, and so I brought her home after a thorough "is okay" speech. We went along the river for a while, so I tried to make her more comfortable before we veered onto the main street and then through the village to my house. I turned the key, lit the room, turned around and finally saw her face in the light, and I can tell you right now that she looked just like she talked. Timid and cute, smaller than me, thin, very long tied brown hair, full cheeks, thin lips. Now sure, she desperately needed a proper shower with a truckload of soap, but it seemed to me that she did wash herself in the river, which is certainly better than nothing. Her clothes, however, looked very old and belonged in the trash, seeing how filthy and smelly they were. I could not have washed them even if I wanted to, considering they were all almost solid, torn, and quite frankly I could not figure out what fabric they were made from, and there were no tags either. When I told her she could, not to mention should, take a shower, she was ecstatic. I guided her to the bathroom, showed her how the whole thing worked, told her to take her time, and pulled a few clothes of mine from the cupboard and left her to it. Something like an hour and a half later I heard her coming down the stairs, all clean and floating in a sweater of mine. However, I noticed that her hair were a mess. I guessed she could not untangle them herself and didn't want to bother me. Fortunately, my little sister had long hair too growing up, so I'm not too bad with a brush. I offered her a seat and went to work in an awkward silence that was only broken by a "thank you," accompanied with some teary eyes. We talked for a few hours until we were tired, so I set her up on a single mattress in my office. We went to bed at the same time, but she quickly woke me up because she was scared, sleeping alone in a silent room after so long. At this point I moved her bed to my own room. I woke up the next day to her snoring in my bed, wrapped in the blanket I gave her. She didn't even disturb my sheets, like a cat would have masterfully done. After being embarrassed for a whole 5 seconds, I got up and went on with my day. A few hours later she was finally up and, polite as always, came up to me with rosy cheeks to apologize both for sleeping so long and for the bed theft. When she was done eating, we went to the store to get her some supplies I felt she needed, like her own shampoo, and some clothes of her own since mine were in short supply. Again, she thanked me profusely and was fuzzy all day long. For a few weeks life went on pleasantly, and despite her trouble getting used to life in a house, she started helping with cooking, cleaning, and other daily tasks, picked up books, and tried to better her understanding of French. I even got her into Tekken. I still caught her in my bed from time to time, on days when she was either feeling particularly anxious or happy. In a word, we built trust and a true relationship. One night when I had trouble sleeping, I caught her sneaking into my bed for the first time, and as she thought she was being discreet, she went to hug me softly. I spooked her when I said, "Hi," but she quickly laughed it off and then became very serious all of a sudden. She muttered that she had to tell me something, and so she started her speech with the longest thank you note I have ever heard, only to finish with, "But I haven't told you the whole truth." She admitted that she wasn't really homeless, that she fled her home, or rather, her family, because they were abusive and, according to her, total nuts. They were apparently recluse, Living in the middle of nowhere in a bunch of troglodyte houses, and the most bizarre part is that her family had been living in there for years, and her parents were raised there too. She fled, because she didn't want that. She cried in my chest that night. In the morning, she asked me what I thought about it all, and if she was still welcome. To be frank, I was pretty stunned, and I didn't get the whole picture in between the crying and her very apparent distress, but I reassured her that I didn't want her to leave, at all. She seemed relieved and immediately hugged me and thanked me again and again. Still, that whole thing bothered me, and I asked her a few questions. Remember the whole, eating raw fish and berries? That's something she learned from them, since they lived like hunter-gatherers with light agriculture. The fuzzy feeling with cake? She basically never ate anything sweeter than a wild strawberry. Thoroughly explaining the shower? They used fresh, rainwater and a bucket. The old clothes? They stole whatever they couldn't produce. And then the big, what? The alien language. They started talking like this with time, because her parents, her grandparents before, and even further up, talked less and less French, Breton the more isolated they got. See, she's probably younger than me, and my own grandparents were born in the 50s. I imagine that with no contraception in sight, hers might be the age of my own parents, so born in the end of the 70s and 80s. She said that every living relative she's ever known was raised in that house. They never welcomed anyone new in the family, though it is quite extensive. Something like 3 or 4 households. I don't remember correctly, but I'll ask her again in the morning if you want. She was raised in an inbreeding fest, and was promised to one of her cousins. I had never heard of anything like this in the 21st century, all Alabama and Pas-de-Calais, Nord memes aside. Of course, she explained all of this to me over a few days, but even then I don't think I know everything, and I'm not sure I'd have wanted to at the time either. From this point on, I took the time to ask her when she didn't know about something, and she became more open about what she didn't understand too. Over the next few weeks, we went to see doctors in order to make sure she was healthy, to get vaccinated and all of this, but also social assistance to try and give her citizenship, or at least regularize her situation, since if we had been pulled over by the police, her lack of ID would have been an issue. Technically she was a ghost to the system, and the French administration being a nightmare, some of her papers are still pending examination. However, it brought us closer. Very much closer, because at some point she stopped sneaking into my bed. Today her accent is still perceptible, but most people don't question it since her French isn't fantastic either. On the plus side, she can talk with some of the old ladies more easily because using Breton words as an automatism tends to make them nostalgic. Or hateful. It's a double-edged sword.
What a wonderful story, Inan. You have a very kind heart. Do you two have any sort of plans for the future?
Thank you. We do have a whole lot of plans for the future. I would very much like to call her my wife, for one, and she's very passionate about becoming a mother despite her tough upbringing. Also, it might sound weird considering everything, but Enora would like to go back to living in the forest at some point. In a house with amenities and not removed from society like she was during her childhood, simply to remain close to nature as she always was. I like that idea, and it sounds healthy to raise children this way. You can bet your ass that it won't be around here, though. She wants to stay very, very far away from her family.
Enora is a pretty name. Is she interested in getting a job at all? That could help you save money faster to move to a different area, but as long as she's happy I wouldn't mind either way. Also, is she worried about her family trying to come find her or anything like that?
It is, isn't it? On getting a job, she would very much like to, believe me. However, her French isn't perfect and she sometimes needs help to read. She absolutely loves books. Her education at large is pretty bare. For example, she barely did any math at all, as a child. Some things, she outright doesn't understand, so she needs to catch up before trying to get any sort of job. She's getting better and better though. To add insult to injury, there's the administrative headache. Try getting a job without any diploma in an unemployment-ridden country such as France. Nonetheless, I don't mind her trying to get a job nor staying at home. In fact, I feel better knowing she's safe and no one is trying to take advantage of her. It's selfish, I know. She's not worried about her family, they're recluse after all, and Enora thinks they wouldn't really care to go after someone that ran away after so long. I'll say that though. We often go camping because we both like that, but there's a whole area she doesn't want us to go anywhere near. The hills have eyes, you see.
Maybe she can do some sort of volunteering once she gets more comfortable with her French, if that's an option where you live. I'm glad she's adapting pretty well. The area you live in looks very beautiful. I'm sure you have plenty of great spots to camp at. I hope to see some of the countryside when I'm traveling in France later this year. It's been a dream of mine to just lay in a field surrounded by wildflowers in the middle of pastoral France.
Volunteering is an option, indeed. Meeting people in general could help her, though I'm not sure this is what she wants since she always stands by me in social situations. Enora says that you won't get her away from me, silly girl. I live in Western France, so the area is very diverse and beautiful when Mother Nature is pleased. France in general is absolutely staggering and I wish you a fantastic travel. I will however apologize in advance for some of its denizens because we can be cunts sometimes, willingly or not. If you can, try to drop by the Loire, it's the most beautiful river in Europe, in my honest albeit biased opinion.
Imagine it would take some time to be comfortable talking with other people on her own. No worries, Enora. My French is worse than yours. I don't stand a chance. I'll be meeting one of my friends in Paris, and I intend on heading down to Lisses because it's basically the mecca of parkour, and there are some legendary jumps there I want to do, but otherwise I need to get a plan together for France. I can handle assholes no problem, I just ignore them. What part of the Loire do you recommend? It looks beautiful from what I'm looking up so far.
That sounds like a good plan, Anon. The Loire is at its best between Nantes and Angers, though Saumur is nice too. The very best, must-see place is Saint Florent-la-Ville. Its abbey and the whole area between it and the river are breathtaking. It feels right. Also, if you're into aliens or stargazing, this whole area is perfect. Sometimes the sky is so devoid of visual pollution that you can actually see the galaxy's arms. It feels like the universe is pulling you into a loving embrace. I can't tell you the number of nights, Enora, and I just took my boat and stared at the sky.
How does your family feel about Enora? You mentioned you had a sister. Also, I may have been misreading it, but it sounds like there is an age gap between you. Do your parents or anyone ever have a problem with it?
Well, my family knows about her, except I haven't told them about the whole Butcher's Creek thing. I can't think of any way this would help their relationship, and it's already pretty complicated. The official story, for anyone who asks, is that she immigrated from the Balkans. No one really questions it all that much, despite the fact that it's obvious bullshit. I came up with it on the spot the first time I was asked and stuck with it for consistency's sake. Her accent is vaguely similar, but that's it. I barely have any friends, so they're mostly okay with her. In fact, they're very welcoming considering. We go eat at my parents' every so often to see my mom, who is very good and accepting to Enora. She knew right away that she was good for me, and she's always polite with her too, so I guess it helps. My father and sister are a bit suspicious about her, and not very welcoming at all, often rude. My sister doesn't really like her at all. She thinks Enora is either weird, I can understand why, a gold digger, or just plain stupid. We had to leave abruptly a few times, but not because of my girl's behavior, that's for sure. Maybe the supposed age gap comes into play. She looks young, I'll give you that, but we don't really know how old Enora is. Somewhere around 17 to 21 at most, maybe. She's not older than me, that's for sure, and she's not growing up anymore. Her family wasn't big on age, they were more concerned about maturity, according to her. I know how fucked up this sounds, and it is. A doctor's appointment told me that she wasn't a minor and healthy. I love her, she loves me. That's good enough for me.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.